Hi, this is Tom Stokel, Global Technical Lead for AutoCAD Product Support, and welcome to this session on understanding and managing your Autodesk licenses. This session will be an overview of network licenses, unique licensing behaviors, and ways of managing your licenses. The concepts I'm describing here will apply to most, if not all, network versions of Autodesk products. Let's start with a very basic overview of the License Manager technology. The Network License Manager is used to configure and manage your license servers, and it acts as a central repository for the product licenses your company owns. For example, when you buy 10 seats of AutoCAD, you'll receive a license for 10 seats. As you add more and varied Autodesk products to your environment, you get additional licenses for those products. The License Manager acts as a controller and handles the license requests that come in when users launch products. Let's look at the basic workflow. A user launches a network license product, and that product makes a request to the License Manager for a license. The License Manager checks the available number of licenses for that product. And if a license is available, then it's granted to the requesting client. During operation, the product periodically notifies the License Manager that the license is still in use. When the product is closed on the user's machine, the license is returned to the license pool and is now available to others. Now let's take a look at what's in a license file. The network license file you receive from Autodesk contains licensing information required for a network installation. The license file contains information about network server nodes and vendor daemons, and then very specific information about what products are licensed. So here's the first line. This is the server line. This is information about the machines that are running the licensed server. So it starts with the word server, is followed by the host name of your licensed server, and then the physical address. License files for redundant servers will have 3 server lines. The use server line forces the product to access servers that are in the server lines. That's basically all that does. The vendor line specifies the vendor daemon that runs on the licensed server and the port that it uses. So in this case, we use the ADSK Flex vendor daemon, and this runs on port 2080. And 2080 is a registered port. Many FlexNet vendors don't specify a port, so Autodesk has registered port 2080 with the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. 2080 is the port where most of your licensing traffic happens. The next thing you'll see is a package increment. This is a subscription-only feature, and it specifies the products and versions that are permitted to run in the package. A package allows subscription customers to run the current version plus the 3 previous versions of the same product. A package is always accompanied by an increment, and the increment parameter indicates how many of these packages are owned. So in this case, the increment here, this is the feature code for an AutoCAD 2010, and then this package license indicates that I can run 2010 through 2007. If you're looking at a license file for a non-subscription customer, you'll see the increment line by itself. And again, the increment specifies the product that's licensed, the license type, number of seats, and serial number. So this feature code indicates that's an AutoCAD 2010 license. It's a permanent license for 135 seats, and this is the serial number for it. The other thing you'll see in a license file is an increment plist, and the plist controls the cascade order for licenses when they're requested in a mixed product environment. Plist increments in the license files are only used for 2009 products and older. Starting with 2010, the cascade order is controlled in a different location, and so the plist increment doesn't appear in the license file anymore. I'll talk more about package licenses and cascading in just a couple minutes. As long as I have this license open, this is a good time to talk about the license file parser. There's a beta of a website at licenseparser.com. And the purpose of the license parser is to allow you to convert kind of the cryptic contents of a license file into a more readable format. So if I go to licenseparser.com, again, you can see it's just in beta. And I will browse and choose the license file that we were just looking at. So you just submit the license file, and what this site does is read it and just reformat it into a more readable report. So I'll choose Submit License File. And now you can see it's read the file. So here's the name of the file that was read. There's the host name, physical address, and his license type. And then it lists out the information about the licenses. So this was a subscription package license for 135 seats. Lists the feature codes, serial numbers, issue dates, expiration. So it's just a much easier way to read a license file. Some license files are very simple and it's pretty easy to work them out, but some license files can get very complicated, especially if you have a lot of different products in them. So licenseparser.com is a good place to go to make that process a little bit easier. Now I want to talk about package licenses. Sometimes we refer to this as prior version support. A package license is a benefit to subscription customers only. If you're not on subscription, you won't receive a license file that contains a package increment. A package allows a single license increment to respond to multiple feature code requests. Each unique product version you run still consumes one license each. However, you're allowed to run the current version plus 3 previous versions of the same product. For example, if you had a package license for AutoCAD 2011, you would also be allowed to run 2010, 2009, and 2008. Again, each version of those products that you ran would still each consume one license, but you're allowed to run the current plus 3 back. Here's an example of a package license. I know we saw one earlier when we were looking at the license file, but we'll take a look at this one again. So this is a package license for AutoCAD 2011, and the area highlighted in yellow there shows the 4 feature codes for 2011 through 2008. In terms of borrowing or cascading, package licenses work the same way as regular licenses. If you get a new package license file, it will supersede any older license file. All right, now let's talk about Cascade licensing. Cascading is implemented for a mixed product environment. And cascading allows a product to obtain a license from a license pool where the license manager is servicing more than one product. This only applies to network licensing. Cascading does not apply to standalone licensing. And it's a feature of the license manager and enabled through the license file. With cascading, lower-end individual product licenses can be used first before retrieving licenses from the more expensive suite pools. And the order in which products are launched affects the way licenses are initially pulled. Let me explain that with an example. Here a customer has a pool of licenses consisting of 2 AutoCAD licenses, 1 Revit Architecture license, and 1 Revit Architecture Suite license. So a total of 4 licenses running on their server. So user A runs AutoCAD and pulls 1 AutoCAD license from the pool. User A then runs a Revit Architecture and pulls the 1 Revit Architecture license from the pool. All that's left now in that pool is an AutoCAD license and an Architecture Suite license. So then user B launches AutoCAD and he pulls the 1 remaining AutoCAD license. User B then tries to run Revit Architecture, but the Revit Architecture license has already been checked out and is used by user A, and so it immediately cascades up to the Revit Architecture Suite license. At this point, user B has consumed 2 licenses, and all of the available licenses are now in use. Within a couple of minutes, the Cascade licensing logic is going to kick in and return the AutoCAD license back to the pool. Once there is a suite license on a machine, any cheaper license automatically gets returned. And it's only when the cheaper AutoCAD or Revit licenses are gone that the product will cascade up to get the suite license. Now, the cascading sequence is going to vary from product to product, and that's usually determined by the individual product teams. For 2009 products and older, the licenses were allocated using an increment plist in the license file. And so you could examine that plist, and if you understood what the feature codes meant, you could figure out what the cascading sequence was. Starting with the 2010 products, the licenses are allocated based on a priority list that's stored in the productinformation.pit file. This file is encrypted and unreadable, so there's no way of looking at it to figure out what the Cascade order is. So what I recommend is that you go to the Autodesk knowledge base, so autodesk.com/support, and do a search on Cascading Sequence. And you'll find solutions out there that list the cascading sequence for products in the last couple of major releases. While we're talking about cascading, this is a good time for me to sideline a little bit and talk about the dynamic licensing in the Inventor products. With dynamic licensing, Inventor always tries to start with the most economical license first. And then as you use the product and activate certain commands forcing a new functionality mode, more expensive licenses are acquired as they're needed. This is different than Cascade licensing, and both mechanisms coexist with each other. For example, I have an Inventor Suite license checked out, and I'm going to do a tube and pipe operation. That causes a routed systems license to be checked out and the suite license to be returned. That's because the tube and pipe operation was forcing a new mode that required a more expensive license than the license I had. Likewise, if I go to create a simulation, it then pulls an Inventor Professional license. The idea is to have one desktop shortcut that gives you access to all the different functionality that you need, without having to close one version of Inventor and then restart Inventor from another icon. Here's the basic functionality mode workflows. You start with just an Inventor Suite license, and then certain commands force new functionality modes that need to get a new license. If you're using a rooted systems license and then try adding simulation functionality, you're immediately going to pull an Inventor Professional license. You cannot pull a rooted system license first and then add a simulation license. Likewise, you can't go the other direction. You cannot pull a simulation license first and then add a rooted systems license. By definition, Inventor Professional is equal to rooted systems plus simulation. Now let's talk about adding or combining licenses. Some license files can be combined into a single license file so that multiple products can be run from one license server. So let's look at licenses that can be combined in a license file. You can combine licenses for different releases of the same product, or licenses for different Autodesk products. Licenses that cannot be combined in a file are multiple licenses for the same product and version, or package license files and non-package license files for versions contained in the package. For example, you can't combine an AutoCAD 2010 package license file with a regular license increment for AutoCAD 2009, 2008, or 2007. So if you need to add additional licenses for the same product, for example, you already have 5 licenses for AutoCAD 2010 and you need another 5 licenses for AutoCAD 2010. Do not combine licenses for the same product and release. What you need to do is request a new license file from Autodesk. And the new license file should contain the total number of licenses for the product. For example, you have 6 licenses for AutoCAD 2010 and you need 4 more. The incorrect method is to request a license for 4 seats of AutoCAD 2010 and then try and combine them in the license file. What will happen is the newer license will supersede the old one and you'll be left with only 4 licenses. The correct method is to request a new license for 10 seats of AutoCAD 2010, and then replace the previous license information for 6 seats with the new license information for 10. So that's how you handle adding new licenses. Let's look at combining licenses. Combining licenses involves editing one license file and adding the lines from another license file into it. Again, licenses that can be combined are licenses for different releases of the same product or licenses for different Autodesk products. So here I have an existing license for 3ds Max Design. And what I want to do is add the new Revit license that I received into this license file. So let me open that up, put them side by side, and now you're looking at both license files. When you edit a license file, only edit them using an ASCII editor like Notepad. Don't use a tool like Microsoft Word that can mess with the formatting of the license file. So what I want to do is add my Revit product increment into my existing 3ds Max license file. So I just select everything, starting with the increment line, all the way down, copy it, and then come over and paste it into this license file. Do not need to copy these top 3 lines, the server, use server, and vendor lines, as these only need to appear once in the license file. So when you do the copy, make sure you combine all the increments that were in the file, and if there were any plist increments listed here, you would want to take those as well. Always include the plist increments. FlexNet will automatically determine which plist is the most current and will use that increment accordingly. If you fail to include a plist increment, certain products may not be able to acquire a network license. So always copy the plist increment as well. So I can close this now and save this file. And then what I need to do is stop and restart the license manager to ensure that the revised license file gets properly read. Now let's talk about borrowing licenses. First of all, borrowing applies to network licenses only. You borrow a license from a license server in order to use a program for some specified amount of time when your computer is not connected to the network. For example, if you need to take your laptop into the field and have access to the product, you could borrow a license for that product and have that license on your laptop while you're disconnected from the network. As you might expect, borrowed licenses reduce the available pool of licenses. So if I have a pool of 10 licenses and someone borrows 1, I now have a pool of 9 licenses that are available. And as long as that license is borrowed, it's not available on the license server. Borrows are done on a per user and per computer basis. And borrowed licenses are automatically returned when a borrow period expires. So if the defined borrow period was 7 days, when those 7 days are up, the license will automatically be returned to the pool. Borrowed licenses can be returned early, but it requires being connected to the network license server. So just as you connected to borrow the license in the first place, you would have to be connected to return it early. The default borrow period is 180 days, or 6 months. We strongly recommend you set a borrow length to a much shorter period of time. This helps prevent licenses from being orphaned. I'm talking about a situation where somebody has borrowed a license onto their laptop and then their laptop is destroyed in a car accident. However long that license was borrowed for, it's going to be that long before it'll ever be returned. There'll be no way to return that license because the laptop is destroyed, so that license will remain borrowed and unavailable until the borrow period is up. So you can see how a borrow period of 6 months could be a problem. I strongly recommend setting it to something more reasonable, like 10 days or 2 weeks. And there's a lot of borrowing behavior that can be controlled using an options file. So let's take a look at options files. An options file allows you to set options for managing licenses on each of your license servers. Using an options file, you can create a report log, you can control license borrowing behavior, you can regulate how long a license can be in use, or reserve licenses for specific users or systems, and restrict access to certain licenses, and control license recovery for idle products. An options file is optional, and it's not required for normal license operation. If you decide to use an options file and you want the same license behavior on some or all of your license servers, then you need to save the same options file to each of those license servers. If you want different behavior on different license servers, then you have to create a unique options file for each license behavior you want, and then save that options file to whatever server where you want that behavior. To create an options file, you just create a new text file and name it adskflex.opt. Create this file using something like Notepad. Again, don't use something like Word to edit this. And you'll place this file in the same directory as your Autodesk license file. So wherever the .lic file is, you'll put the options file in that same location. Once there, you'll launch LM Tools and perform a reread license file. If you've added an options file for the very first time, I recommend you just stop and restart the license manager. Oftentimes a reread does not work properly when an options file is being added for the first time, as opposed to making edits to an existing options file. Once done, you then want to confirm the options file operation by looking at the debug log file. All right, so what can you do with an options file? Well, let's take a look at some of the most common options file settings. One thing you can do is set a license inactivity timeout. This forces the license manager to automatically reclaim any licenses that are inactive after a specified period of time. Inactivity is defined as a product sitting idle with no commands being issued within this time frame. If a product goes idle and a license is reclaimed, users will be given the option to save their current drawing. This option looks like this: timeout, and then the feature code of the product, and the amount of time. So this line sets a timeout for a specific product. In this case, it's an AutoCAD 2010, and it sets it to 1800 seconds or 30 minutes. So if a user launches an AutoCAD 2010 and it sits without any activity for 30 minutes, the license will be revoked. Note that the lowest acceptable value you can set is 15 minutes. If you want to apply this setting to all products, you can use the timeout all option. Then you don't specify a feature code, you just specify a timeout period. And this sets the timeout for all the products that are being managed by the license server. As you begin managing your licenses and who can access them and who can't, it's useful to define groups of users or computers. So groups are used when you're reserving or restricting license usage. And the way you define a group is just like this. Use the group option, followed by the name of the group, followed by the usernames that belong to that group. So in this case, I would have defined an engineering group consisting of those three users. A host group lets you define a group of computers as opposed to users. So in this case, I would have defined a drafting department group that's consisting of 3 computers. Use the Group Case Insensitive On option to disable case insensitivity for user and computer names. The default is for them to be case sensitive, and so if you don't set this particular option, then you just have to make sure that you spelled everything correctly. For example, with drafting department, I would have to make sure that I had capitalized both D's. But if you set group case insensitive to be on, then it doesn't matter what case I use. Now that you've defined some groups, you can use them to reserve licenses. Using an options file, you can reserve a specific number of licenses for a user or a computer or a defined group. This helps ensure that there are product licenses available when needed, because licenses that are reserved are unavailable to other users. An example of this would be if you had a couple of people that were working on a very time-sensitive project and you never wanted to worry about whether or not there would be licenses available to them when they wanted to work. In that case, you could reserve licenses for those people. This option looks like this. Reserve 1, that's the number of licenses, then the feature code of the product that I'm reserving, and then user and the username. So in this case, I reserved 1 license of AutoCAD 2010 for user Smith J. Here's an example of reserving a license for a host, in this case a computer. So this reserves 1 license of AutoCAD 2010 for a specific computer. Similar syntax for reserving for a group. In this case, I'd be reserving 5 licenses of AutoCAD for anyone who belonged to the engineering group. And finally, a host group. So in this example, it reserves 5 licenses of AutoCAD for the computers that belong to the drafting department group. Note that you can also reserve licenses based on IP address range, or by using an LM project variable. Check your documentation for more information on how to reserve that way. You can use an options file to restrict maximum license usage. This limits the number of licenses that can be used by a user or computer or group. This helps ensure maximum license availability by limiting access to those licenses. So in this case, I've limited this user to only 1 license of AutoCAD 2010. If this user were to try and pull an additional license, it would be refused. This example limits members of the engineering group to only 5 licenses. And here we limit the computers in the drafting department group to only 5 licenses. By now you can probably see how the use of groups and host groups makes it easier to manage access to your licenses. You can include license usage. This defines access to specific licenses by a user, computer, or group. It kind of sounds like something we've already covered. The difference here is that any user or computer that's not in the include statement is blocked. You should bear in mind that there's also an exclude statement, and exclude always takes precedence over any conflicting include statements. For example, this include statement allows this particular user to pull a license of AutoCAD 2010. And this example allows anyone in the engineering group to pull a license for AutoCAD 2010. I recommend you use either exclude or include, but you kind of minimize your confusion by not using them both. Now let's look at ways of controlling license borrowing. The borrow low water option is kind of an interesting one. It specifies how many licenses cannot be borrowed. So this example statement specifies that 5 licenses of AutoCAD 2010 cannot be borrowed. What this does is ensure that at least 5 licenses are still in the network pool. You would use this to make sure that your pool of licenses on your server does not get diminished by having everybody borrow the licenses. Max borrow hour lets you establish how long a license can be borrowed. For example, this statement limits the borrow period for AutoCAD 2010 to 3 days, or 72 hours. That's what the number is at the end. 72 is in hours. Remember, like I said earlier, the default borrow period is 180 days. So you definitely want to go in and set a max borrow hours to something reasonable. Use the exclude borrow statement to prevent specific users from borrowing a license. And remember that exclude takes precedence over conflicting include parameters. The include borrow statement designates users or groups that are allowed to borrow. This example statement provides the ability for anyone in the engineering group to borrow a license of AutoCAD 2010. Let's take a look at a sample options file. First, as a comment, I just threw this in here. Any line in the options file that's preceded by a hashtag is treated like a comment and just ignored. So this is a nice way to add comments to your options file if you feel like you need to better explain why you made certain decisions about some of the options you used. The report log line creates an activity report for use with SAM Report Lite. So if you add this in here, designate where you want the report log to go, it'll generate a report log, and you can read that using SAM Report Lite. Then I set group case insensitive on, and then I defined an engineering group consisting of those 3 people, and I've specified that the engineering group is allowed to borrow licenses of AutoCAD 2010. I've overridden the default borrow time of 6 months by setting a maximum borrow time of 10 days. I then exclude one particular user from accessing AutoCAD 2010, and I set an idle timeout period for all of my Autodesk products to 90 minutes, or 5,400 seconds. There are a few other things you can do with the options file. I recommend you take a look at your documentation for more details on these options and some of the other parameters that are available. In summary, we've taken a look at network licensing and license files. We've looked at some unique licensing behaviors and better ways to manage your licenses. I explained some of the contents of license files and showed you how to combine license files. I also talked about borrowing licenses and how you could manage borrowing and other license access using an options file. I hope this information has been useful and that you feel like you have a better understanding of Autodesk licenses and how to manage them. Until next time, thanks for watching.